Welcome to Over 40, Fabulous and Pregnant. I am your host, Jamie Massey, and you're listening to episode 83. If you are looking for pregnancy stories of women over 40, you've come to the right place. And today on the show, we have Katie on to share her pregnancy journey at 42. In this episode, she shares her breast cancer journey and how she and her ex-boyfriend created embryos to try to freeze her fertility before cancer, only to deny her the use of the embryos when she was ready to use them. Katie and her current husband created embryos with donor eggs after she finished her cancer medication. So yes, this is a donor egg story. If you are interested in using donor eggs or are working through the process, I have a donor egg guide that will really help you through the process and help you be able to answer those questions that you have to answer along your journey. I will make sure and have that link in the show notes for you. Katie shares her story with a glass of wine, which is exactly how I think every story should be shared, in my opinion. And this week's listener feedback comes from Adele. She says, "Hi there. I just wanted to say thank you for your inspiring content. After lots of failed fertility treatments, I am still hoping to be a mom someday. I am 44, single, and seems like so much content in society in general tells me I've missed the boat. However, I see women on your page giving birth and having healthy pregnancies in their late 40s, and it gives me hope I need to continue on with this journey. Thank you so much." Well, Adele, 44, I say, is definitely not too late. You know, we share pregnancy stories on this podcast all the way from 40 to 57. Yes, we had one guest, Barb, that was 57 years old giving birth, which, you know, it just goes to show that it's possible at almost any age. So Adele, good luck on your journey. And for my pregnancy update, I am 31 weeks pregnant. I hope these don't get old, by the way. I still have reflux and it's still pretty bad. It kept me up like at least 2 nights this past week. I'm popping the Tums like nobody's business. I am doing the papaya enzymes, which the number one ingredient is like glucose. I'm also doing chewing gum, and I drink all the water. So most of the time I can at least get through the day with all of those combinations. But we also had a growth scan last week, which, you know, sonograms never get old, in my opinion. Everything is really looking good. She said normal fluid levels are between 8 and 24, and I'm 24. So because it's on the high side of normal, they want to keep an eye on it. So I will probably continue with growth scans every few weeks to make sure that stays in check. And according to his measurements, he weighs 4 pounds and 4 ounces. My shower was this past weekend. It was so fun celebrating with friends and family. I've had friends that have known me since birth. My best friend from first grade was there. I had college friends and new friends, and of course, my cousins, my aunt, my sister, my mom was there. It was at a tea room, and it was just so perfect, which now means it is time to get the nursery ready. And that's going to be on my to-do list, along with birthing classes and breastfeeding classes and physically just getting ready. It's really important to me that I am physically ready for birth. So enough about me already. Let's get into Katie's story at 42. Katie, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And Katie is on to share her pregnancy journey at 42. But before we begin, Katie, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Katie and I am married with a soon-to-be 2-year-old who keeps me very busy. I live in the UK in West Yorkshire, so I'm a northerner. For anyone listening from the UK, there is a big divide. And I work as a sales director in the aerospace industry, so quite a full-time, full-on job as well, keeping me busy, as well as a toddler at home, keeping me super busy.
Yeah, that sounds stressful.
Yeah, and then the husband, the second child, we can't forget him.
Can't forget him. Well, before we started recording, we started talking about where to start your story. And I think it should start with your ex-husband and trying to have kids with him.
Okay. So my story kind of starts in when I was 34. I found out that I had breast cancer, and I just recently got back together with my ex-boyfriend who I'd been with for 2 years, and we kind of were back together. And he actually stayed, he's Australian, and he was leaving to go to Canada the next year, but he stayed with me. And as far as I was concerned, we were in a relationship, and he looked after me whilst I went through my cancer treatment. And the first part of before I started my treatment was the fertility issue. Obviously, going through chemotherapy, it was going to affect my fertility. So as I was 34, they said I could do 1 round of IVF to extract some eggs. And then obviously the decision was whether or not to freeze the eggs or make them embryos. Mm-hmm. And Google was my best friend at that time. Obviously, a lot of things were going through my mind. And, you know, the fact that I had cancer was secondary to the fact that I thought I was never going to be able to have a child.
Yeah.
And that was my priority. And the hospital didn't want me to have an extensive amount of hormonal treatment. So I was able to do 1 round, do the injections, and then have an egg retrieval. They got 5 eggs during the retrieval. And obviously now I know that that's quite low, actually really low. And at 34, my fertility was obviously already on the decline. But at the time I was like, okay, I think the discussion I had with my ex-boyfriend, with my boyfriend, obviously at the time, was before going into the treatment, was let's freeze half eggs, make embryos with the rest. I think in my head I had vision that I was going to have 20 eggs, and it was going to be, you know, an easy decision. So obviously when I came around from the sedation and they said there was only 5, we made the joint decision to go and try and get embryos out of all 5 of those. He told me that no matter what happened, no matter if we were still together, he would never he wanted me to have a child, and he would never not want that to happen for me. And that's why he was prepared to do this. So that was the conversation that we had. We had counselling at the time. He had counselling session to make sure he fully understood what he was committing to. Obviously, he signed documentation to say he was willing to obviously give a sperm, and he would be the father of any resulting children from the embryos. And he was quite happy. And obviously, I later found out at that point he knew that we weren't going to continue to be together. But for me, I thought we would be together anyway. But at least I felt protected that if we weren't going to end up together, I was still going to have the chance of children. Mm-hmm. Because if he had told me a different story, then my decision to freeze eggs rather than embryos would have been the way I would have gone with it. It was only because, you know, embryos have a much higher chance once they're embryos, when they're unfrozen, for the second part of the IVF, that I ever considered that, or didn't even contemplate that it would be something that would then be taken away from me. So
yeah. Were you saying earlier about he already knew that y'all weren't going to be together then? Did I misunderstand that?
No, so he after all of my treatment and everything like that, he went off to Canada to do his thing that he was doing in Canada. I thought that he had family in England and we'd come back together. But he always had it in his head that when he left to go to Canada, he was never returning and we weren't going to be together.
Okay.
Obviously, he stayed, he's looked after me, he's seen me through my treatment. And then so we were in different places, but obviously I was going through a hell of a lot at the time as well. So
sure.
I probably was clinging onto him and a relationship because of all that I was going through. I didn't necessarily think or believe that anyone else would ever want me, and and all the things that go through your head. So maybe he didn't want to say any of that with everything that was going on, and we were just on different pages. But when after that all happened and we did split up, I still had no reason to believe that when the time was right, I wasn't going to be able to use the embryos. I think I probably naively thought that because he'd already signed for them, that was the done deal anyway. And at the point that I was ready, I could go to the clinic and they were there ready and waiting for me to go with. And that wasn't the case either. So because of my treatment that I had, the cancer treatment that I had to go on tamoxifen for 5 years. And my oncologist said that whatever happens, you can't even attempt to have a pregnancy on tamoxifen because it affects the fetus. So you can't even think about it. And after 5 years, we will agree that you can come off it. I'd rather you went on it for 10, but we'd come off it at 5, if obviously, because you'll be 39 then. And then at least you can have an opportunity to try and see, obviously, test your fertility at that point. So that was kind of the plan in my head. So out of 5 eggs, we got 2 embryos. I think 3 started the process and only 2 went the full. So it was 2 that we had frozen. So, 2 attempts. And I suppose I was naively happy in that knowledge, justifying, being on tamoxifen and it was okay. I was going to be 39, but I had these embryos, and those embryos were 34-year-old embryos, and everything would be good. And obviously that's not how it panned out.
Tell us a little more about that, if you don't mind.
No, so this happened in December. So the embryos were made in December 2012. I started chemotherapy in the February 2013. And so we then split up, I think, in the October 2013, quite horrifically, actually.
Oh.
A lot. I was due to fly to Canada for a second time. No, the second time. And he basically told me not to get on the flight and that he wasn't interested in us being in a relationship anymore. And then very shortly after that, I found out that he'd also, whilst he was in the UK, had been seeing somebody else. So whilst I'd been at my worst, no hair, no facial hair, bloated, feeling like crap, looking like crap, he'd obviously been off with somebody else. And obviously that's not somebody that really I would have wanted to have been with, but at the time I was like trying desperately to keep a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so that took quite a long time for me to kind of get over, as well as trying to pick myself back up after having the cancer treatment and kind of try and find myself again, and the new Katie and all that went with that. And I moved with my job. I wanted a fresh start. I just completely was like, right, I'm going to the south of the UK, and moved and worked down there and kind of built myself back up, got into a lot of fitness things. I went to Machu Picchu. I did a 450-kilometer ride around Vietnam. I climbed Everest Base Camp. So I just put a lot of effort into me and getting myself, healthy and good and mentally. to where I wanted to be as the 5 years were ticking on. And then I think I went to the fertility clinic for like a checkup, and the fertility clinic where I'd had the IVF treatment. And she basically told me at that point that I wouldn't be able to use the embryos without the consent of my ex-partner. And I was like, that's going to be difficult because we haven't spoken in 4 or 5 years. I think
now, how old
4 years.
How old were you? And did you already were you already involved with your new husband at this point?
No. So I was single at this point. So
Okay.
I was getting close to the 5 year mark, and I was single, and I was like, that's okay. You know, I'm a big girl. I can do this on my own. You know, I've got embryos, so I don't actually need the man element of it for the process. So I'll go and see. So I went to, because in the UK, in certain areas, if you're under 40, you can get funded IVF treatment through the NHS. So I went to my local clinic and asked them whether it would be possible. And they said that, yes, as long as you start the treatment before you're 40, you will be okay to have it funded. And I said, well, I've already done part of it because I've already got 2 embryos. And then she said, well, as long as your partner hasn't got any other children. And I was like, well, I don't know because he's not my partner anymore. And she said, well, that might be difficult because you need to find that out, because even though you're doing it by yourself, he is the father, and you would still not qualify if he's now had other children. I thought that was really, really
strange.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, well, I need to contact him anyway. So then I thought, okay, I'll just leave that for a minute. And I had an appointment because the fertility clinic, well, obviously where I had the IVF was back up in Manchester. So I went up to an appointment in Manchester, and then the fertility doctor there said, you're going to need to get his permission. And I was like, but he's already given his permission. Yeah, but he needs to give it again. He needs to consent for you to be able to use these embryos. So I was, okay, right, I need to now find a way to contact him. Now, luckily, I knew his English auntie, and I got in contact with her and got his mother's number. Then I contacted his mother. Now, I'd known his mother because we'd been in a relationship for 2 years, in 2005 to 2007. And obviously, when we kind of had got back together, I'd been speaking to her on the phone and everything. So I spoke to her and said, you know, I need to get hold of Clint, his name was. Can you please give me his details so I can contact him? I found out from his auntie that he was engaged, living in Canada, engaged, and had a child. And I was like, okay. So anyway, his mum replied to me and said, he won't let you contact him directly, but what do you want? Kind of thing. So I replied to her and said, basically the spiel, this is what I want, just need him to consent, and, you know, off we go. Don't want anything from him, don't need anything from him. I'm not expecting him to pay for this child if there is a successful child. I just want him to get in contact with the hospital and give him the consent. It felt like an age, like days and days before she came back to me. And basically she said, unfortunately, Clint says no. It's a decision that he's jointly made with himself and his partner. His partner doesn't want a sibling of their child being brought up somewhere else in the world, or there being a sibling somewhere else, a half sibling somewhere else in the world, regardless of the fact that he would never bump into that child. It's not something that he would be willing to do. And then I replied back to his mother and said, well, that's not what he said at the time. He promised that nothing would change in that respect, that he would make sure I was able to have a child, and went through all of the things that he'd said. And then she replied back again and said he'd said that he was only willing to have a child with you at the time, if you'd stayed together, that it was never part of his plan to have a child if he wasn't going to be the father, which is totally not true.
Mm-hmm.
But then obviously there was another person in the mix at this point, because obviously he was engaged to be married, and obviously the partner would have had something to say about it. And now I've obviously got what I've got. I can look back and I can say, okay, if I was her in that situation, how would I have dealt with that? How would I have responded?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how much did she know of my situation and scenario? He probably had never mentioned me to her at all. And then all of a sudden, his mum's saying, by the way, these embryos that you've got with this other woman that you've probably never mentioned to your wife-to-be wants to know if you'll consent to the child. And it probably was a difficult conversation for him to have. But obviously, I was devastated.
Sure.
Yeah, very, very. This was kind of happening just at the time that I was moving back to the north back up north with my job and everything. And just at the time that me and my now husband, Frankie, were kind of starting actually committing to a relationship, because we'd known each other for, we'd have known each other for 12 years at this stage.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd been friends, we've been part of the same social circle growing up, in our 20s and everything, and hanging out together. He's Irish and he lived in Manchester, and I lived in Manchester after university, and we had a group of friends together. And then my best friend, who's from Ireland, I would go and visit her, and I would see Frankie, and we'd have nights out together and stuff like that. But nothing really was ever more than just, a bit of a, friendship. And then something happened when I went over in 2018 on a trip, and we started talking about him coming to visit me. And then he did, and then we kind of became again, and then it started to become a regular thing. And then so that was 2019. And so whilst we were having lots of conversations, I'd obviously told him all about these embryos and everything. And he was like, obviously he couldn't understand why anyone would not do that. And he said, maybe we should just I should just look at my fertility and see, because in my head I was like, well, no, there's no point. It's done. Like, I was told that, when I went back to the fertility clinic to see the horrible doctor, she said, well, 5 eggs is rubbish. So we could try it. We could try again, but there's no point. If you only got 5 when you were 34, you're now 40 years of age, you ain't going to get any, there's like no chance or little chance, so why bother type scenario.
And she has no idea.
No. And so obviously that was really hurtful and upsetting. So I said to Frankie, I was like, I don't want to go back to her. I'd want to start it somewhere with someone else. And, he was like, well, why don't you come off tamoxifen and let's just try, because you never know.
Uh-huh.
Like, there's all these stories, and we know we want to be together. So he moved over to the UK, and we moved in together in February 2020, just before lockdown.
How old were you by this point?
So I would have been 41, going on for 4. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, 41, because I would have been 41 in the September. So then we got locked down. And then obviously it was a case of, well, we can't do anything else, so let's just give it a try. So I came off the tamoxifen, and you have to kind of wait, I think, 3 months for it to be out of your system. And we just did that,
Could you explain what this medication is for? Just for the people that don't know, because I don't know.
Yeah, so the breast cancer that I had was hormone positive. Okay. So I had high levels of progesterone and estrogen in my body, and that was what was making the cancer grow. And then I had another thing called HER2 positive, which makes it grow even like quadruple the rate that it would do ordinarily. So I had it removed, had the lumps removed, and I had radiotherapy and chemotherapy. But tamoxifen is something that's given to receptive positive cancer, which should, if there's any lingering left of any little bits of cancer, it should then keep it at bay because it keeps your hormone levels down. So basically it strips you of all of your female hormones. So if you were to get pregnant, a fetus wouldn't get the female hormone, it would only have testosterone. So has got a very high risk of deformity.
Gotcha.
Because it's not getting the a level, because obviously every fetus should have the right level of female and male hormones into it, or to feed it at the start. And obviously well, worse than that, isn't it? It's the female hormones that helps it settle and grow, and it wouldn't have any, because what tamoxifen does is it kind of like puts you in a menopausal state, makes your body believe you're in the menopause. So you go through the hot flushes, you go through the night sweats, and that's why when you go on to that medication, you go through all of that, achy joints, but I was still having periods. So not everybody that takes it still has I was still having a regular cycle. And then, so I always thought to myself, well, I'm still having a regular cycle, so I must be, that I must be fertile then, because the two, they kind of go hand in hand, but they don't. But it's easy to think that if you're having a regular period, then you've got a chance of getting pregnant. So I was like, okay, so let's come off tamoxifen and we'll just try. And we did that through 2020. Then we moved into our house that we live in now in October 2020. And then I was like, right, if we're doing it, we're in our new house, with the house we bought together. This is setting our life up. This is what we want. Let's get straight on it. So we got in contact, started obviously researching the clinics. And what I had to look for is a clinic that doesn't use a high level of hormones in its treatment plans. Because one of the things, so I spoke, first of all, rewind. In September 2020, I went to see my oncologist for my cancer checkup and said that I'd come off tamoxifen, and he was like, well, you shouldn't have done that without speaking to me first. And I said, okay, well, I have, and we've tried, and nothing's happened in the months. So now we want to go further. I said, right. I said, I need you to say that that's okay. And he said, well, yes, that's okay, because tamoxifen and pregnancy are the opposites of the graph. So if you're on tamoxifen, you're down here. If you're pregnant, your hormone levels are up here, and cancer kind of grows somewhere in the middle. So being pregnant is actually as good as being on tamoxifen, is how he kind of explained it to me. And I was like, oh, I'll take that. Obviously, the journey to get pregnant is probably where you're in the danger zone. But what he said to me as well is that he does it on percentages of reoccurrence, that if you've done tamoxifen for 5 years, the results suggest that you have reduce your chance of cancer by so much %, and that being on tamoxifen for another 5 years is only going to get you an extra 2%. So you've done the hard graft, like you've got to think about you and what you want for your future. You haven't had any reoccurrence it would have been 7 years, coming up for 7 years by now. So, that's good. That's a good point to be. You're not harming yourself by coming off tamoxifen, because that's also something that I had to consider. It's no good me selfishly wanting a family only to get cancer and die again, and leave a young child with, from a husband to bring up. So there was a lot of that kind of played into it. So when I was looking at the fertility clinics, I was having to consider because the one thing he said is, a quick spurt of hormones, but then you don't get pregnant, that could have a negative effect. So I did a lot of research, and then we had a meeting, I think it was in the December 2020, with a clinic in Manchester, a private clinic this was, because obviously by this point I was well over the threshold for NHS funded IVF. So it was obviously a financial consideration as well about the cost of what it would cost for us. But I had the appointment, and I went and had my the tests, and they said, look, you are a woman in your 40s and your egg reserve is exactly as it would be for a woman in their 40s. No better, no worse. There's nothing to suggest that actually your treatment has made it any worse. But obviously you have a 10% chance. Like I would advise any women in their 40s using their own eggs. He said, I can see 3 follicles at the moment. You know, obviously if you were stimulated then with hormones, but the quality of those, that's the one thing that we can't guarantee because we don't know enough about how chemotherapy affects any of your eggs, and you could find that you've got some, but then the quality might not be good enough, and all of these other kind of conversations. And then he said, but there is another option if you want to consider it, and that is donor eggs. So using a donor egg, he said, your womb and everything, you were safe and to carry a child be absolutely no problem for you. You're fit, you're healthy, everything's intact down there, it's all working. And if you were to look at that option, also the drugs that you have to take, because all you have to have is implantation. So you don't have to have I suppose, as you know, all the drugs leading up to the egg retrieval,
right?
And then all that. All you need is to kind of get your cycle in line with being at the right time to have the implantation, and then go from there. And I said, okay. So, but it's obviously something that you have to go away and talk about with your husband, well, my boyfriend, as we were then, and have a conversation about it and decide. So that was a really difficult thought process, because obviously I had gone through a period of grieving for a child that I was never going to have of my own biologically, because I wasn't allowed to use the embryos, to hope that miracles would happen, and during lockdown, when there was nothing else to do, we would suddenly get lucky, and things would happen naturally. To then going, okay, I'm with somebody that we're going to spend our life together, that wants children, and we're in the he's also in his 40s, so we've done the whole living our lives, doing everything we want to do singly, and now we've come together and we want to be together, we want to have a family. And then the hope of all of that, to then now considering, okay, what's the best thing to do? Put my body through something that might cause problems. Is that selfish of me to do that just because of biology, when I could go down the route of donor eggs, which obviously has a much higher chance, and I still carry the baby, I still give birth, the baby is still mine, and I'm not putting my body through it, and the risk of not being here for that child is a lot less than if I was to consider going down the biological route, because my oncologist, he's a cancer, the best cancer expert in the UK, he's one of the top doctors, he should know, and he's telling me, oh, you've got to be careful with the drugs that you're putting in your body, and that's why he kind of sent me down the path of trying to find the best clinic that uses the least amount. But then the least amount doesn't always mean that they're as effective.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a good while of contemplation, and my husband, my boyfriend, was like, well, it's your decision, isn't it? Because either way, I'm going to be the biological father. So I want us to have a family, and to me, I can't make that decision for you, because I'm in. It makes no difference either way for me, but as a father, but for me as a partner to you, I would say that the safest option is the best option to go for, because I want you here to be the mother to my child more than I want the biology of that child, because he'd done a lot of research about nature and nurture, and bringing up a child. And, you know, proof in point is my toddler, who is the attitude of me all over. You know, the characteristics that she walks around with are definitely mine.
Yeah. So how long did it take for you to come up with a decision?
So we had the kind of the scan and everything and the appointment with the doctor before Christmas. So I said, right, well, let's go away, have Christmas, have a break from work and everything, and just like think about it. And I said I wanted to talk about it with like my closest friend and kind of get her perception, because she'd been through the cancer journey with me, whereas Frankie hadn't. We'd kind of been like long distance friends, but he hadn't really been there through all of that and understand how all that went and everything. And then so in the January, like late January, I said, no. So let's make another appointment. I think we should go down the donor route. So we had the appointment and we got told we needed to go on the donor, obviously put our requirements down. And it's very different in the UK, I think, to America, is obviously the donor pool is very limited and you have to wait for somebody to come forward. And usually it seems to be university students that, because they get expenses, they don't get paid to donate, but they get expenses. And the clinic in Manchester, there's a lot of universities there. Or the other option was egg share. So somebody's coming to go through their IVF treatment, and because of the cost, which is about £11,000 to £12,000, they can half that cost by sharing their eggs.
Mm.
So
Interesting.
Yeah. So there's a few more people that do that, because that way they obviously get the chance of cheaper treatment, and obviously for affordability factors, it kind of takes about 5,000-6,000 off the cost. So
sorry, are you saying that if you go the donor route, you almost have to be matched with a donor?
Well, yes, you do, because you put down your requirements. Now, obviously, you only get to know the most basic things about the donor: hair color, height, eye color, level of qualification, interests and hobbies. Obviously, they have to go through a full screening, like medical screenings, to be tested to make sure they haven't got anything. And Frankie had to have a cystic fibrosis test. And then so there's a list, and then there's a waiting list. So because there's limited donors, you go on the list and you wait for a suitable match to be made available. And it might be somebody that has started the process and is waiting to go for their egg retrieval, or somebody that's doing their own IVF that says they want to be an egg sharer and goes on the list, and then they look at the matches. So we went on it in the January, and we were matched with somebody in the April, and she was an egg sharer. So again, they give you details of the age. They tell you about their age. I think she was 31 or 32. And so she was like, right, we'll send out the drugs to you that you need to start taking in line with when she's going to be scheduled to come in for her egg retrieval. And then we will call you. Obviously, Frankie went in and gave his sperm, and then we'll get a call when it's my time to go in. So obviously you're on an edge. You're going, right, well, this date is the date that she's going for the egg retrieval, so I should hear that day, and then I should be going. And then you're trying to calculate, age, when you'll be due, and all those things, like jumping way ahead. And so then I got a phone call on the day that the lady had gone for the egg retrieval to say, really sorry to have to tell you this, but the retrieval was only so many eggs, not enough to share, because they have to have so many to be able to share. And the egg sharer lady was given the option to go again or to proceed with what she had.
Mm-hmm.
And she chose to proceed with what she had on her own, and therefore the egg share was off. So that donor was gone. Then you're obviously back on the list and back waiting for the next available one that you're kind of going to get matched with. And I said we didn't have too many requirements, and obviously the requirements the second time was like, okay, well, you know, blonde hair, blue eyes, because my husband's blonde and we both got blue eyes, or like light brown hair, 5'9", because we're both like quite tall. I'm 5'9", and so I'm very tall for a girl, and he's 5'9". And education level, I don't know why we think this matters, but you know, being at a reasonable education level of like degree level or something was kind of like one of my things. And I think back and I think, well, why on earth does that matter? Like, really, at the time of things. And I think hobbies as well, you kind of look for the people, the donors that have got hobbies that kind of are similar to yours. So we said, oh, we don't care what their hobbies are. We don't care what their education level is. We don't really care if they have, you know, blonde hair. Like, we just want to get matched with somebody now. So then they gave us a call. I think this was going into the May to say, okay, we've got somebody else that's coming on the books that will match you. She's going through all of her tests. So give us 3-4 weeks and we'll, and we should be at the stage where we're ready to proceed. So 3-4 weeks came and went. I rang up and said, what's going on? They said, she hasn't signed her paperwork. We can't force anybody to sign their paperwork because it's their decision if they want to continue the process. So she said, but she says she is going to sign it, and then she's got to come in for assessment. So I was like, right, okay. So we held on another couple of weeks, and then this was taking us into June. And I said to my boyfriend, I was like, look, I'm going to be, so this was June 21. So I was going to be turning 43 in the September. And I was like, I just want like this. I didn't expect it to take this long. Yeah. Now, they did say to us, the waiting list, you could be waiting up to 12 months. But I was like, no, that's not going to happen. Like, that can't happen. We haven't got 12 months. You know, this needs to happen. So I rang up the fertility clinic and I said, look, what options do we have here? Like, because to start the whole process over again with someone else, is that going to make it better or worse? I don't know. And she said, you know, the UK donors are very scarce. If you were going in within Europe, you would have much higher chance because they have anonymity. Is that the word? Anonymity.
Sure.
So, and they get paid to do it. Okay. So if you go to Spain or Croatia's another one, or Cyprus, you will have loads of donors in their 20s. The banks are full because, you know, these girls will go multiple times because it's money for university and, you know, and at that point, I'm sure I would have thought, if I'd known it was a thing and I was getting paid for it and I was trying to fund my university life, I would have considered doing it, because you're young, you don't think about fertility, you don't think about the effects, and you don't even think about whether you're helping somebody or there's going to be a child of yours at some point down the line. You don't think about that. You just think about cash.
Yes.
But also the fact that that the child and the donor can never know about each other as well is something that works for both parties as well. So she said, and I said, well, it would have been nice to even know this at the start of our journey, and that could have been something then we could have considered, because a lot of the UK clinics now partner with a European clinic for those that then can get access to the egg donors in Europe, but then come and have all of the other treatment locally.
Yeah.
Like all the tests and the pregnancy tests and all those kind of things. So anyway, I was like, well, what's our options then? Because does that mean we have to start this whole thing again? Does that now mean that we have to pay a load more money? Because obviously we aren't in a financial position just to be able to find another 11 grand, and, you know, what we haven't actually finished the process. So how does it all work? And it's horrible that you have to even have that conversation about cost. Like, And I think I went through a little bit of a spiral at this point, going, anyone that I found out that was pregnant naturally, I just felt such a hatred for, and it was ridiculous. But it was like, how can you do it so simply? You know, the people that were saying, "Oh, I didn't even want to get pregnant," and I'm like I'm going to stab you in the eye, because you know, like, that's not the thing that you should be saying to someone that's having fertility.
Yeah.
And that it isn't just easy for. So I just said, well, I don't want to have to start the whole thing again. So she said, right, well, let me see what there is in the frozen egg bank. And I went, what's the frozen egg bank? So, because obviously at that time we were going for fresh.
Yeah.
That's what we decided or been told was the best chance. And I think you get conflicting, because some people are told frozen's best and some people are told fresh. So I was like, well, what's in the frozen bank? She went, well, let me have a look. And then she had a look in the bank. She said, we've got 7 eggs on ice here. And they are from a 22-year-old, 5'5", hazel eyes and medium hair. And I can't remember what the education and the hobbies were. And I was like, we'll take them. Because at this point, I was like, actually, those things don't really matter as much as you think they do at the start. Because, you know, I was having a lot of conversations with the people that I had told I was going through this. And they were like, children don't always look like either their parents or one of their parents, or is a mixture of the both, and it's hard to know. And, you know, why does any of that really matter? Like, I've got 2 sisters. One of them is slightly taller than me, and the other one is 5'5.5". And we've come from the same parents. So, like, my little sister ended up being the size of my nana, you know, so it doesn't always like transpire that you know, the genes. So I was like, okay, let's just go for it then. So that was in, I think we were now into early July. So after that, it kind of did move pretty quickly, linked up to when my cycles were. It must have been the end of June. Got another load of medication to then. I'd not actually had to take any medication at this point, because the other medication that I didn't have. I only took, I think, 5 days, and then I had to stop. So I got the other medication, started that, and in between all of this, Frankie proposed, and we got engaged, and we went back to Ireland and had a big party to celebrate our engagement. It kind of turned into an engagement party, an impromptu engagement party. And then, so this was at the end of July, and then we came back, and I went in on the 3rd of August for the implantation. So we got the phone call on the first day to say that 3 had started the process as embryos. On the first day, 2 were looking good, 1 not so good. And then on the 3rd day, I got told, right, 1 hasn't gone any further. You now have 2, but the one that's looking do best is a 9 cell. And that's really good, apparently. So come in and let's get that one implanted, and we'll see what happens to the other one. So I went into the hospital.
Hold on. Did you end up taking all 7 eggs?
Yeah, so it was what the donor had 7, so we took all 7.
Okay.
Again, it's different. You don't have to pay per egg. It's whatever that donor has got, you get the whole lot.
Okay.
They guarantee them that in the package that we paid for, they guarantee a minimum of 6 eggs. But whatever they got, we would have got. Obviously, because they were defrosted. There's a bigger risk when you defrost them of some of them not surviving, which was kind of the reason why all those years before I'd gone down the option of wanting to do embryos with my ex-partner, not eggs, because I'd researched that eggs had a 8% chance, I think it was then, and embryos had a 25% chance on defrost. And I knew they were going to be in the freezer for a while at that point. So I think so. Yeah, I went into the hospital, and Frankie had to give his fresh sperm, and then I went in for the implantation, and the lady that did it was shaking. She was like,
Why?
I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can do this. This is a 9-cell. And I didn't really appreciate at the time what that meant. Apparently the 9-cell is the best embryo level that you can get on day 3. Well, a 10's the best, but I don't think you ever get 10s. But 9 is like top of, like, you can't get better. So she was so nervous because she was like, if this, and she had to call her senior in, and he had to come in, talk her through the process of doing it, and put the camera on, and was looking at the camera to make sure that it was going in, and obviously, you can see it go all the way in, can't you, and go up, and then there's like you get the little picture of a little dot of where it's sat. And then she was like, when I came out, one of the nurses was like, "Oh, I've heard it's a 9-cell. Good luck, good luck." And I was like, okay. And we got out of the clinic, and I said to Frankie, I was like, that kind of felt weird. Like, what does that mean? Like, why is everyone so excited? But when we were in the waiting area, there was a lady that had brought her baby in, that was obviously had been all swooned over. All the nurses were swooning over her, saying, thank you to the clinic, and I've got this beautiful baby. That's all from your support and help. So I thought, well, that felt like a good look, like the whole 9-cell thing, and the baby, like, being there. And I just thought, God, I must be getting some good luck.
Yeah.
Like, I've had a lot of bad luck situations. This has got to be my time for some good luck.
Now, did you freeze the other embryo? Was that good enough to freeze?
So they said, we will carry on with it, and we'll contact you on day 5 and let you know. So they contacted us 2 days later to say, unfortunately, that embryo never continued past a 3. So would I let them destroy it, because basically it wasn't going to be a viable embryo. And I was like, well, I can't say no, can I? If it's not going to be a viable embryo, one that I could ever use.
Yeah.
So disappointedly, but also pressure-wise, I'm glad that I found out after I'd already had the embryo implanted, because it was a case of this either works or we're done. This is done, because we've got no more embryos, we've got no other chances. This is our only chance now, without having to then start the whole process again and fork out a lot of money. And at the time, I suppose I was also just really conscious of my age, because both my sisters had children in their 20s, mid-20s. I had a lot of friends that had children that were but maybe had them in their 20s, 30s, and there was a big gap, and the gap was only increasing. And I just was like, am I, and then you start calculating the age that you're going to be when they're at a certain age, and doing all that crazy stuff. But so I always felt the time pressure. But as it turned out, we waited, and I was very proud of myself. I waited. It was actually we went in on the Monday, and the blood test was the following Friday. So it wasn't 2 whole weeks. And that's what I kept saying to myself. It's not 2 weeks. It's only like 11 days. We can do this. It's 11 days. And the one thing that I found really hard is not to do anything. Because I think that, like, if you keep yourself busy, time flies. But it was rest. You're not allowed to exercise. Only take light walking. Obviously try not to get any stress in your life. All these things. And I was like, so just kind of, time's ticking away, and I'm, what day is it today? And then we went in on the Friday morning for the blood test first thing. I think it was like 7:30. We was at the clinic. And then they said they would call us before the end of the day. So I was picking my husband up at 4:00 from work. And I remember sitting on the sofa about 3:00 going, oh, like, aren't I do I feel pregnant? I don't know if I feel pregnant. I don't feel any different. It hasn't worked. And then as I was driving to pick my husband up, the hospital rang, the clinic rang, and I was like, can you just ring me back in like 10 minutes? Because my husband's not in the car and I want us to be together. So can you ring us back? And she ended up ringing us back half an hour later, and we were back home, and we both sat on the sofa, and the call came through, and I put it on speaker, and she started. Frankie looked at me and he went, by the tone of her voice, he was like shaking his head as if to say, this isn't happening. This is not, you're not pregnant. And you know, that drop feeling. And we're just like, oh, why? And then she went, I'm really happy to tell you that you're pregnant. And I was like, way! And honestly, we were absolutely like jumping up and down, so ecstatic. And then she was going, well, I'm not surprised. It was a 9-cell. And I went, okay.
I love that. They really like to drive that home.
Yeah, exactly. So we got the result, and then after that, I think I'd had a stock of pregnancy tests up in the bathroom, and I went straight upstairs to do one just so I could have the proof for myself. And I think I spent the next couple of weeks, every couple of days, just checking, because there's that gap.
Why didn't you take a test before the doctor? Was it going to give you too much anxiety?
No, I think like I convinced myself that anything that I was going to do would jinx it. So if I took a pregnancy test, that was it. I wouldn't be pregnant, and I've jinxed the whole thing. And then I'd like feel awful that if I hadn't done the test, I'd have been absolutely fine. And I just was like, no. And Frankie was really good at saying, you know, it's only a couple of days. It's only a couple of days. You only have to wait a couple of days. So yeah, so we were just absolutely ecstatic, and I think we told only Frankie's mum at this point knew from my family side that we'd actually done this. And then my mum wanted to take me wedding dress shopping. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I'd said to Frankie was, if we do get pregnant, we have to get married, because I'm not having a baby with a different surname and having a different surname to my child. And you know, I was going to get, in my head, I was going to be married by 33. We were now 10 years on. I was like, you know, there's no waiting around. There's no, you know, expensive wedding and all the hoo-ha and all the drama. I just want to get wed and just have my close family here. And at the time, we weren't properly, it was like the second year of COVID anyway. So I think there was limitations, or there was certain restrictions, and you'd have to wear a mask and to get married and all those things. And I said, right, well, let's have a winter wedding. And then it's, you know, I'll be about 5, if we was successful, about 5 months pregnant. And then that's a good time then to give me enough time, the other side of it, to, you know, not be too big and manageable, and in the good trimester as well, is what I was thinking. So As soon as I found out pregnant, obviously brilliant, but it also meant full steam ahead on the wedding plans. We need to find a venue. We need to do everything else, because if I wasn't pregnant, then I would have been happy to wait till the summer to get married. But I was like, no, we're having a baby. I'm being a married woman when I give birth, which was my like stipulation. So yeah, that was quite. So I think the months between finding out and the wedding was just, you know, full on. Yeah, blur. Just went so fast. There was so much to do. Yeah. So my mum took me wedding dress shopping about 2 weeks after we found out. So I would have been, well, no, about a week it must have been, because I would have been 5 weeks, because they do it that you're 2 weeks pregnant, but you're 2 weeks on the blood test, but you're 4 weeks pregnant, aren't you?
Right.
Yeah. So I would have been about 5 weeks at this point. And now she says, and I don't remember this, that I told the woman in the dress shop, and she was outside, my mum was outside the curtain, that I was pregnant, and she'd overheard it. Now, I do not remember that conversation at all. But about 2 weeks later, the whole family came over to because we live about an hour and 40 minutes away from the rest of my family. So they all came over on a bank holiday weekend, and we went to a park, and we were just stood around, and my niece and nephews were all playing on the climbing frames and that. So they were out of earshot. And I went, "Oh, we've got something to tell you. We're pregnant." And my mum went, "Yeah, I know, because you told the lady in the bridal shop." And I went, "I don't remember that." So she'd known about it and sat on it for a couple of weeks, because we would have only been about 8 weeks by this point. But I think we were just too happy and excited, and we'd been for the first scan, and we'd got, because that's what I think I said, we're not going to say anything till we've had the scan and we see something. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely, because I was doing the pregnancy tests like every couple of days, and just to be sure. And then obviously when the scan happens, then you do feel a little bit more reassured again, don't you? And then and a couple of weeks later, between the next scan, you're like, but because you don't feel anything at first, and you feel, I don't know, I always thought that you would know, or you'd feel something. And I had a little bit of nausea, nothing like horrific. I craved beef, and I don't eat beef. I haven't eaten beef since I was 12, and all I wanted was beef burgers. So like, I'd pick my husband up from work and go, "We need to go to McDonald's, I need a beef burger." And he was like, "Again?" I went, "That's what I want." So for about, I don't know, right up until my hen do, because I think I had a beef burger on my hen do, and that was the first time that I was like, "Oh, I don't even like these. These are disgusting." So that was the November. So between the getting pregnant in the August to November, I ate a lot of beef burgers. And then that day, that was the end of it. I didn't want them anymore. They were back to being horrible to me again.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
that was really the only craving.
You said you didn't have a ton of nausea, but how was it? Did you feel good during your pregnancy?
Tired, so first trimester, very tired. And obviously that's the one that you also can't tell work, isn't it? So it's like, luckily though, for me, I work from home, so they didn't necessarily know that I used to sneak off and have a little half an hour nap
How
in the middle of the day. Yeah, and then come back to like my desk and carry on working and going on calls and things. But yeah, I say the only thing I really had in the first trimester was nausea. What was my main concern, or my main issue, was acid reflux, yes. And heartburn, and not sleeping because of it, and being sick. When I lay down at night, I couldn't get to sleep, and then it would all come up, and then I'd be sick, and then I'd be back in bed, and then I'd be up, and I'd be down. And I took medication for it, and it helped it, but it didn't get rid of it. And I think legs or something was always under my rib. So it always felt like I couldn't breathe sometimes, like when you take a breath, like I thought it was her feet, but I don't know what part of her body it was, but something was in my right side of my rib constantly as I got bigger. But for the first, I think 22 weeks, I just looked fat. And I just looked down and was like, it's a time, isn't it, where you want to look pregnant because you get treated differently. And I was at that stage where you could see people thinking, do I say something? Do I not say something? Is this the right thing? Because she might just be fat. And I don't want to say congratulations. she's not expecting a baby. Which did happen.
Was there any products that helped you through pregnancy that you could recommend?
I'm always going to be my pregnancy pillow. That was my lifesaver, especially with sleeping and the acid reflux and then not being able to get comfortable. That was definitely the best thing that I had. I tried lots of creams and that other people recommended for the stretch marks and everything, but I'm not very good at keeping up with these things. And so I kind of got a drawer full of all these products that I might have opened, tried, and then forgot about. But yeah, I think that was really like my main thing. And I was going to get the, the heartbeat monitor.
The
Is it the
Doppler?
Doppler? But I was talking to somebody that said, you could drive, if you get that, you can drive yourself insane, because all you want to do is find the heartbeat. And then if you don't, then you panic.
Yeah.
And you're not a medical expert, and it might not be nothing, and you'll be at the hospital every 5 minutes. And then that's just going to cause you loads of anxiety. And, you're getting, because of your age, you're getting regular checkups. Like, you don't need it. Like, and that's why I was like, I think I am glad that I didn't get that in the end, because I would have obsessed over it. And, when you start to feel her move, that's when you know it's all good anyway, and you're comfortable in the knowledge you can put your hand on your belly. And but it was great when you started to feel like the little bubbles, because I was trying to describe it, and I was like, it's like bubbles are going off in my body, like coming up. I don't feel any movement. I just feel these bubbles. And everyone was like, what are you on about, bubbles? And I was like, that's the only way I can describe it. It's like movements of air or something.
Yep.
And then obviously a couple of weeks after that was when I felt her actually move for the first time. And then after that, you just want to put your hands on your belly all day long, don't you? Just sit there like this.
Or just watch. Sometimes I just sit there and watch my belly just kind of flutter and move all the time.
Yeah, no, it's so great. But yeah, no, products I wasn't very good at, and diet as well, I wasn't very good at. I didn't want to go ridiculous and just eat loads of crap. So, and I have like a relatively healthy diet anyway. Obviously, I was on beef burgers for a good fair few months, but I think for me, exercise is my anxiety release. Mm-hmm. So I kept up my exercise, and I do like strength and conditioning training, and I do it at home. So I've got all my weights here, and I just do it in front of YouTube videos. So I kept up with that. And the woman I was following was 10 weeks, was pregnant as well. And 10 weeks into it, she said she was pregnant. So she was 10 weeks behind me. So when I was doing my workouts, obviously she was catering a lot of the stuff to being pregnant, which was fantastic, because obviously that was the stage I was at as well. So it was kind of really good timing. And I suppose just I spent a lot of time walking and going out with friends and that. But more like than anything, I was just busy wedding planning. So
yeah.
The months were just flying in.
Yeah. What about her gender? Did you find out she was a girl during your pregnancy?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I knew she was a girl. I told everybody she was a girl, and they were like, how do you know that? I said, I just know. And for years, I said, I don't ever want a girl. I only want boys. If ever I was talking about it, I'm not a girly mom. I'm not a girly girl. I'd suit better having a boy. But then when my niece was born, and we had a really, really close bond, like I was her favourite auntie, which used to upset my sister. And we had a really close bond. And that was when I kind of, I suppose, turned around and thought, actually, having a girl would be quite cool. So in my head, she was a girl. And I was like, we're going to get the test done. I want to know. I need to plan for what we're having. So we went and paid privately at 16 weeks to find out the gender. So we went along, and then we got a little teddy bear with her heartbeat in it, and the colour of the teddy was obviously the gender. So they were like, do you want to know? I said, oh yeah, of course we do. I said, but can you give me 2 little envelopes with sealed envelopes with it in? Me and my husband, well, Frankie will know, but we want to have like a gender reveal with the family. And I also took one for my hen do and did a gender reveal at my hen do as well, which was quite cool. So yeah, I was, like I say, I was happy, but I already knew. I was like, she's a girl. So and I think my husband took a little minute to say, well, I won't have a boy to play football with or do all these things, but she likes her football, so I think she'll be going off to play football and with him and everything anyway. So
oh, good. What about preparing for her? Because this is your first child. What about classes and getting the house ready?
So I was lucky that my younger sister at the time had 2-year-old going on for 3. So she had all of the child stuff and was about to put her son into like a toddler bed and change his room around. So all of the furniture became we took all the furniture. So we had the cot and all the changing table and all of that stuff. And she'd put stuff up in the loft because they were thinking about having a third, and then they decided they weren't. So all that stuff from the loft came out, and that came to our house.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, so there wasn't, I mean, other than the travel, the car seat and the pram and that stuff we had to buy, but everything else we pretty much had donated, which for my sister, which was brilliant. And we got her bedroom ready, and that was another reason why I wanted to know the gender, because I wanted to know what colour to paint the walls, and obviously to prepare and buy some clothes and kind of be ready for her. So again, we probably left all of that quite late. I think we didn't get the furniture brought across till like February, and she was born on the 13th of April. So it was like end of February. It was like 6 weeks before that we were actually getting the room ready. So I think we were cutting it a bit fine, but we did have obviously a lot of the other stuff ready and waiting. So, but yeah, I think also I just didn't want to rush into that, because you just always have that niggling, despite her being a 9 cell, that niggling doubt that, that anything can happen. And you hear these horror stories, don't you, that like people say, oh, they're trying to be nice, and they go, oh, I've heard about this person that, had a stillborn at 39 weeks. And you're like, that's not the kind of stories that I want to hear. Thank you very much.
Yes.
And I think there was a couple of times where I was on a work conference in the March, so like a month before she was due, and I was like, I haven't felt a move I said, when was the last time I felt a move? And I was there going, oh, and I just had this panic, and I rang the hospital, and they said, come straight down and we'll get you hooked up. And I like kind of went, I've got to go, in floods of tears, like in this conference with all my colleagues. I need to go, and rushed off to the hospital. And obviously everything was fine, but you just have that panic, because there's still, I don't know whether if you get pregnant naturally you have that panic, but definitely I think when it's something that you want so much, like it's easy for your brain to turn against you.
Oh yeah, definitely. Now, what about classes? Did you take any of those?
Yeah, so I thought, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go the whole hog and see what classes there are around and sign up to everything and do everything. But because of my medical history, I already knew that I was having a cesarean. So when I went to one of the classes and they were going forward to the birthing process and all of that, I was like, well, this is great, but I'm having a cesarean. So like, it's going to be different. And they don't really go through that. They talk more about obviously labor and natural labor and drugs and all that kind of stuff. So, and I think the first one was how to hold a baby correctly. I'm an older sister with a brother that's 17 years younger than me, and have loads of nieces and nephews, and have babysat for like 17 years of my life. So I didn't know how to need to hold a baby correctly or how to put a baby grow on or all of those things. So I did it because I was like, I want to, because it's part of it, but it wasn't helpful because I wasn't new to children in that respect, or new to babies. But I think if you have, I was talking to a lady there that didn't have any siblings, didn't have any cousins, and had never been around babies, and she put the baby grow on the wrong way around on the doll, and she was like, oh, I'm never going to get this right. So I think it does help depending on your circumstances, I think.
Yeah. Now, can you help us explain why you needed a C-section? Because you had cancer? Is that right?
No, so because I was on tamoxifen, There is lots of different side effects. And unfortunately, the lucky one that I am, I got one of the most rarest side effects, which is fibroids growth in my uterus. So I was going for having a lot of pain, like a knife that was stuck under my pelvis. I felt like it was digging into my ovaries. That's what it felt like. And then when I went to have me scanned, they said you've got a huge melon-shaped fibroid growing in the uterus. So we can either leave it, change your medication and see if it shrinks, or we can have it removed. And I was like, it's causing me too much pain. So I went and had a myomectomy, which is the incision is the same as a cesarean, but obviously instead of pulling the baby out, they pulled out the fibroid. So I was told that, and this was in 2014, that if I was ever to get pregnant, then I would have to have a C-section because they've already damaged, there's already scarring and damage to the uterus wall or something. So that's what I was told. So that's in my head what I thought was going to happen. And then when I went to, and I said this to them, they said, right, well, we need the information from the hospital. Now, the NHS is very good at some things and very bad at others. Hospitals within the system don't communicate to each other. So I was in a West Yorkshire hospital, and they couldn't contact or find out from their system anything to do with the Lancashire hospital. So I had to go and get the letter, or go and get them to give me a letter to say what had happened, and then I had to take it and give it to the hospital. So this took months. So as far as I was concerned, I was going in for a C-section. That's what I'd been advised. That's what I was working towards. Then this letter turned up when I was about week 32. It said, no, there was no uterus rupture. She would be okay to not have a C-section. And I was like, so when I went for my appointment at 30, I think it was 32 weeks, they said, or 30, was it 34 weeks? They said, okay, so you don't have, we booked you, you're booked in for one at 39 weeks, but actually you don't need, you can choose now whether you want one or you don't want one. And I was like, right, well, in my head, I've got it all planned out. I know exactly when I'm going in. And then I was like, oh, now I don't know, because I wasn't taking, I was like, oh, maybe I do want to try and do it naturally then. Like, why not? So I went home and I said, we talked about it again. I talked about it with Frank, and I was like, well, I don't know what to do now. And he was like, well, again, your decision, isn't it? Like, do you want to go, when it's happening and it's all set up, or do you want to go? So I went back on my 36 weeks scan and said, right, forget the C-section then. I'll go for it. Like, and then they turned around and they said, okay, but you're carrying a large baby at the moment. Based on the growth rate, she's going to be over 9 pounds. And if we'd still want to bring you in at 39 weeks and induce you. And I was like, yeah, but if you induce me, it could take 3 days. Because obviously I'd heard really bad stories about induction, about it taking days and it being painful and all of this. And they said, also, you run the risk of having damage because she's so large. If she comes out wrong, then she might end up with cystic fibrosis or damage to her shoulder. And I was like, I really, you're not selling this to me. So I was okay, right. So the safest option then is to go back to the original plan then of having a C-section. So for 2 weeks, I thought I was going to for 32 weeks, I thought I was going to give birth via C-section. For 2 weeks, I thought I was going to go for the natural, or 3 weeks. And then I was back to the C-section plan. And I was just like, it's just like a roller coaster, like make your mind up. So then I was scheduled there was 39 weeks and 1 day booked in for the C-section.
Mm-hmm. So you want to walk us through that?
Yeah. So going to the hospital and obviously knowing you're going to give birth that day and not knowing what time, but it seems all a bit odd. And you feel a bit, I don't know. I don't know what it's like in America, but in the UK, there's a thing called too posh to push. A lot of the celebrities are renowned for going for C-section because it's the easy option. But when you're actually talked through what a C-section is, it is not the easy option because it's major surgery. And obviously I knew that because I'd had the myomectomy. So I knew that there was a recovery, but I also knew that I recovered well. Now, I was 8 years younger at the time, but, the healing, the scarring, the walking and everything else, recovered it. So in my head, I was like, this will be fine. It's just the not being able to drive for 6 weeks that gets annoying. But I was like, I can do this. So anyway, went in, got ready. It was still the time where you had to wear masks. So I had my mask on. I got my husband to take a picture of my last picture of me pregnant before I changed into my hospital gown. And then I think when you go in, they tell you what is your time slot of the day. And I think mine was 11 o'clock. So then they whisk you down. And it really is quite, that part of the process is, I think, quite quick. It's all a blur. They give you the injection so you don't feel anything. They test that you're numb. You're on the gurney. And obviously Frankie sat this side. They've got the screen up. And then I just remember this Lion King moment, where I could hear it. I couldn't feel pain or anything, but you can kind of feel the tug, or you're moving because they're tugging and they're obviously getting her out. And she was making noise there. And I knew she was alive because I could hear her before they actually lifted her up. And then they kind of lift her up and hold her up in the air, and she was screaming. And then they took her off over, and they were like, oh, she's a big one. And then they took her off over and put her onto and obviously started doing all the things. So that bit was good. And then something happened to me, and obviously I don't really understand what happened, but everyone started panicking. And I just heard the anesthesiologist say, I'm going to give you some more drugs. And then she went, not to worry, but they can't stop the bleeding. So you're just hemorrhaging. They're just going to keep working at it. I'm just going to give you some more. And then I think I just started to go really weird and felt sick, but felt out of it, sedation, but kind of I was really out of it and drugged up. Mm-hmm. And they were kind of so I couldn't have her put on me. So they gave her to Frankie, and Frankie held her and was kind of leaning over. But I don't really remember a lot of it. I've seen there's pictures of it, but for me, it was just a blur. And I was like, what's going on? And then they wheeled me into the recovery. And then I think I said something like, oh, you won't be going back to the ward. You have to go somewhere else. So don't worry, we'll go get all your stuff. I don't know whether they told me that or Frankie told me that afterwards, but they wheeled me into the recovery part, and I was laid on my side, and they gave Evelyn to me, and then they was trying to get her to latch, but I think I was laid on this side, but they put her on my bad boob, and I was trying to tell them that there won't be any milk out of that one, that's not going to work. And I didn't feel like anybody was listening to me. Mm-hmm. And I was getting upset because I was obviously this is meant to be the best moment of my life, and I don't feel well. I don't feel like I'm really here, and nobody's listening. I felt trapped. I was saying something and then they weren't listening. And I don't know whether it's because I wasn't actually saying it. I just thought I was saying it, or they weren't actually just not listening. Uh-huh. And that bit was really weird, and I don't know how long it lasted. And they wheeled us somewhere else into this room, and then they was in this room on our own. And then they said, "Oh, we'll be back." And then this monitor was going beep beep, and it felt like it was doing that for hours. Nobody came back, and Frankie was obviously the baby hadn't had any milk and hadn't latched or anything. And then when I kind of came with it a bit, I said, "We need to feed the baby. The baby hasn't been fed, and the nurse has just abandoned. Where's the nurse?" And then somebody came back in to turn the machine off. And then Frankie was still holding her, sat on the chair, and she hadn't have any clothes on. She was still in the towel. She hadn't had anything to eat. And then I was like, like help turn me over and like give her to me. And then I was like holding her, and then I was starting to come round a bit. And so what had happened was I'd hemorrhaged and they couldn't stop the bleeding. And then they'd given me more drugs to be able to fix it. And it said it took them another 20 minutes to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
And because they'd given me the extra drugs, obviously that took me a lot longer than 20 minutes to come round from. And obviously they hadn't read my medical notes. They didn't understand that I'd had breast cancer, and then they weren't just able to stick her on my nipple and it'd be okay. So I was really upset. And this really lovely nurse came over, and I said, look, my oncologist has told me that I don't know whether I will be able to produce breast milk or not. I've got one boob that has had lumpectomy, but my nipple and everything is still there, so it should still all be connected. And then I've had reconstructive surgery on the other one, and I've actually had my nipple removed and moved further up. So that one is probably the one that's not going to work. But we don't know. And my oncologist thought it was hilarious that he came up with this. She'll just have to suck it and see, was what he said.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I said to the nurse, and obviously when you have a C-section, it doesn't come in straight away either, because your body's shocked into this rather than it being like natural. So she worked with me, and we got some colostrum out of it, and like in a little test tube, not a little test tube, a little syringe, and gave it to her. But she was having to be on the like little bottles. And then when I was in that room, I think till about 8 o'clock that night. And normally Frankie would have had to leave after 2 hours after the birth. But they just abandoned us in that room and kind of left us there. And then when they came back in, it was tea time, about 5 o'clock. And they said, oh, well, you can stay until you get kicked out of here. So he left about 8 o'clock, and I was like thinking, oh, brilliant, I've got a room to myself. I'll settle down for the night. And then they came in to wheel me out and take me back to the ward, where there was 4 women on the ward together, and obviously 4 crying babies. So you don't get any sleep. And then I was trying to feed her, and she wasn't latching. And then I was asking for help, but nobody seemed to want to help me. And at that point, I'd managed to get up out of bed, and I was very close to the reception bit. So I would waddle over and go, can somebody please come and help me and like help me with this, because I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but she's not latching. And they said, oh, we'll be over. And then eventually somebody came, and like hours and hours later, and they just said, oh, you're not producing any. I said, but I am. I said, because the other nurse spent the time with me and she got it out. So I am. You just have to, it's a bit of a process. You just have to work with me. And they were like, oh no, you're just going to have to give her the formula for now, because they were too busy. They were all too, like the ward was full, they were trying to get as many people out there as quickly as possible. So the next day they said to me, oh, if you can walk to the toilet and back and go for your wee, then you can be out of here at tea time. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'll be happy with that. I want to go home. It's not a place you want to be, and when you don't feel like you're getting a good quality of care, and you are just a number. And I know that obviously NHS, there's a lot of shortages and all of that, but it wasn't the place that I felt like I was going to get any support. And I didn't know what I was doing when it came to breastfeeding. So we came home at tea time the day. So I gave birth at 11:11 on the 13th of April, and we were home by 6:30 p.m. the following day after a C-section.
Wow.
So obviously I waddled out of the hospital, and Frankie had the baby in the carrier, and then we came home. And then I just remember we sat on the sofa. Evelyn was in the carrier on the floor, and we were like, now what? What do we do now? I was the most like, yeah, she's our responsibility. This is what we wanted.
Yeah, I get that. How was your recovery after getting home?
So I mean, I think I recovered quite well. Now, the healing, like my scarring, I know from all the operations that I've had, my scars heal really well.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't worried about that, and it did. It kind of healed really well. And movement wise, I think I was getting up and down the stairs, no problem. I think my husband was telling me to stop doing so much and just take it easy. But I think by day 5, I even was out just walking up the street with the pushchair, with the pram. He wouldn't let me push it, but I did a picture me pushing it, pretending to push it a little bit, but just like slowly walking. And I was on. You take the pain medication, as long as I was taking that every 4 hours, then it felt good. If I missed an hour or 2 and I'd been sat down for a while and I went to stand up, that's when I knew that would be my kind of, I need to take painkillers. I must be behind on my painkillers for the first 4 to 5 days until I was able to start easing off them. I think the one thing that I always remember is when you lay down on the bed and you've got the baby on you, and then getting up just doesn't happen. And even for weeks afterwards, it was a case of hand the baby over, do some funny kind of roll to the side, get your legs out of the bed and pull yourself up, because you've just got no stomach muscles anymore.
Mm-hmm. And
I think that was the biggest shock to the system, as maybe something I'd forgotten, is that you're starting all over again, rebuilding your stomach muscles then.
Mm-hmm.
And when you squeeze, nothing happens.
Yeah. What about mentally? How were you?
So I think I went through the usual emotional state. I think day 3 was so I gave birth on the Wednesday, and it was Easter weekend. Mm-hmm. So it was Good Friday through to Monday. So the nurse came, I think, we were at the hospital on Thursday. I think she came the Friday, and they only had skeleton staff on over the weekend. And the next nurse that came basically weighed her and said, she's dropping too much weight. I'm coming back tomorrow. If she hasn't, you've got to stop starving her, I think is the word she used. Stop starving her. Give her some milk. And I went, I'm trying, but she wasn't latching. And I got a pump, and I couldn't work the pump, and I was tired, and obviously you got those days of emotion. I was like, I just want somebody to help me. How do I do it? Why isn't she latching? She's not interested. And then she was helping and going, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do. And then she'd latch, and then she'd drop off. And then, so I ended up pumping and then putting it in a bottle and giving it her that way. And that was okay for a couple of days. But when obviously she was saying to me, you've got to feed her, that night I had a good cry. And then I was like, right, I'm just going to have to give her, this breastfeeding malarkey is just not going to work. I'll pump, we'll do a pump and milk. I'll pump what I can, feed her that, but we'll have to top it up with milk. And then when she came back within 24 hours, she said, she's already put on weight from you feeding the milk for 24 hours. And I was like, well, obviously I didn't deliberately starve my child, but
yeah,
just try. And it was the amount of weight that she lost. And I just remember as soon as she said that, I just was in floods of tears. My husband was just like, it's just hormones, she's all right. There's nothing wrong with her. We'll feed her. She'll be fine. And she was. And she was a really, really good baby. She was very content most of the time. And she wasn't a big crier at all. Obviously, she woke up through the night. But I remember, and, some mothers are going to hate me for this, I enjoyed them waking up in the middle of the night, because we would have, me and my husband would sit there and we'd watch it. We'd get her back to sleep. We'd get snacks. We'd watch a bit of telly at 2:00 in the morning, and it would become part of our little routine. And then we'd obviously settle down after about an hour, go back to sleep, and then one of us would get up for the next feed, and then the other person would sleep, and another one would get up for the next feed. So even because I would sit and pump, and then we'd watch telly and I'd eat snacks, and it was, I enjoyed it. I don't remember feeling really knackered, but but I'm sure I was. I think there's a picture that we sent to our friends on our first week. We had the first week after, when she was 1 week old. I took a lovely picture of her in a cot, and then I took a picture of us, like, covered in sick, looking unwashed, a bit straggled, and going, yeah, you do feel it. But yeah, I did enjoy that time as well. But then, like I say, we didn't have, compared to other people that have talked about horrendous screaming, we didn't have that with her. She was, she cried, but we didn't have bad colic, or I think there was a patch of a couple of weeks where she might have cried a bit more than she had done before, or that she did do after. But yeah, I think we were lucky.
What I forgot to ask whenever you gave birth to her, how big was she? Because the doctor said she was big.
She was £8 4 ounces, so she wasn't huge.
Yeah.
But yeah, she was supposedly going to be over £9, and she was £8 4 ounces. So after all that, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like they get that wrong every time.
Yeah, and my sister did warn me this. She said that for her too, she was told that she was going to have a very small baby, and they were worried about them being small, and they both weighed in at £7 something. So they do. I think, I don't know how they know. They can never get it exact, can they? And I don't know.
No. What about breastfeeding? How did that end up going?
So I went to a breastfeeding clinic, but because of the fact that it was Easter, the next one that I could get into, she was already going to be 2 weeks old. So obviously I couldn't not feed her for 2 weeks. So what I was doing was pumping. So whilst I'd bottle feed her, then pump. No, I'd pump, then give her what I made, which was actually quite very little for the amount of effort I was putting into it, and then top her up with formula. But that was good, because then my husband could give her the formula, and I would give her the breast, and then I would always try and just put her on my boob, even like if she wasn't suckling, just to like kind of rub her nose in it. That sounds awful, doesn't it? But just to let her know that was there. And then I went to the clinic, and they said that she was tongue-tied. So if I wanted to, I could take her to the hospital and get a tongue cut, and then we could give it a go. But by this point, we were 2 weeks in, and I knew that I wasn't producing that much milk anyway. So I was like, sounds like awful to go and get a tongue cut, and then only to find out that I'm not giving her enough milk anyway, and we're still going to have to give her the formula. And so I was like, you know what, I'll just keep pumping for as long as I can, and we'll just keep doing it this way. And and it was tiring, pumping, feeding. Felt like I always had my boob out and a pump on it, or I had her on it feeding her a bottle. But I was like, I'll stop at 8 weeks. And eventually I carried on till 13 weeks. And I thought, that's the 3 months where she's getting at least some of my nutrients and all the good stuff. And then I just went just then to bottle feeding. And that was probably one of my biggest disappointments, because that was, I suppose, the only thing that I thought of that it was great. I obviously carried her, but, I wanted her to have something of mine, and that would have been the something. And I knew there was a possibility that it wasn't going to work for me, but I just really hoped that it would, and that would have been part of our journey. But obviously it just didn't end up that way. And she was a bruiser, so she is, the fact that she was underweight and dropped that weight by the 3rd day, and it did take about a week or 8 days for her to get back to the weight that she should have been. But then since then, she has been way up on the percentile, and she's all right. Not so much now, she's running around, but her baby days, she was a right little chunker. So she was definitely fed well, and she's loved her food. ever since, and she's a good eater.
Oh, good.
So I didn't do any damage anyway. That's the main thing.
Well, do you have plans to have more kids in your 40s?
So I am contemplating it, but obviously we would look abroad, because I think that some of the research that I've been doing, you can actually get clinics that, because of the number of donors that they have going through, you can get facially match, like your facial screening. So for the donor to be, so that although you won't have the same genetics, is like, obviously aesthetically looking, there could be some similarities. And I think, that would be quite nice. But then I also think that it's a hard one, because if we'd had another embryo, we would have already gone and gone and used that, because they would have been obviously full siblings and there would have been no question. But now it's the thought of it all having to start again, and the unknown, and the journey. So it's one of those things that we keep going from one side to the other. Should we, shouldn't we? We look at her sometimes and think, oh, we'd love to be able to give you a sibling, because we want you to have each other, especially when she's playing with her cousin who's nearest in age. I'd be like, oh, you could get someone about that age gap and it'd be lovely, but we will see.
Exciting. What has been your biggest challenge being pregnant in your 40s?
I think it's probably my own issues about what other people think about it. Not necessarily that they have been thinking badly about it or anything like that, but perception, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. That happens to me also. Is there anything you'd recommend that would help prepare someone for pregnancy and birth over 40?
I think don't spend your time on Google. Like, actually speak to people that have been through it, because Google can sometimes not be your best friend. And yes. But also to make your own decisions, because you can get lots of opinions, but you know what's right for you and what's best for you and your family.
I love that. And what advice would you give yourself when you're pregnant if you could go back?
Take more pictures and enjoy the pregnancy. I think I was in too much of a rush to get to the end that I forgot that being pregnant was what was part of what I wanted. And, to enjoy that more, because I look back now and think I didn't take enough pictures. I didn't spend enough time just looking at and enjoying how my body was changing, and, just sitting with her and like talking to her and doing all those kinds of things that I wish I'd done.
Yeah. Now, our listeners that are trying to conceive over 40, what advice do you have for them?
I would say be patient, and it's not always going to go smoothly. And as long as you prepare yourself for that, but it is worth the efforts. It is worth the tears. The journey is tough, but it's well worth it.
And where can our listeners find you on the internet, Katie?
So I am on Facebook in my old name, my name that I had for 43 years of my life, Katie Swash. And I'm also Swashbuckle or Buckled 78, I think, on Instagram. I'm not on it very much, but you can find me there.
I'll make sure and leave a link in the show notes.
Thank you.
Yeah, lovely. Well, Katie, thank you so much for reaching out and sharing your story today.
Thank you very much.
And that wraps up another great episode on Over 40 Fabulous and Pregnant podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you next Monday.